Hello, and welcome to part three of our ancient Rome unit. As I said, this is part three, the legacy of Rome. Part one, we talked about the Roman Republic, and part two, we talked about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. So, what we're going to look at today in part three is what did Rome leave behind for us? Please make sure that you have the contributions or legacy of Rome notes ready as we begin. So, what areas of ancient Rome uh, did they leave huge contributions in? Well, it's art and architecture, technology. Again, technology, keep in mind what technology is. Technology are things that makes life easier. Okay, completely different than what we think of as technology today here in the 21st century. So, probably not electronics. Science, medicine, language, and religion, as well as law. So, let's take a look at these categories today as we look through the legacy of Rome. So, looking at architecture particularly, we're looking at a building known as the Pantheon. Pantheon, Pantheon. This building has a dome, which is a huge, huge breakthrough in architecture when it comes to history. So, when we look at the Pantheon, again, this is a building that has a dome to it. What you see there is in the circle, the arrows pointing to it, is what's called the Eye of God, which we'll take a look at here in a second. So, when it was built by the ancient Romans, it was a huge temple to multiple gods and goddesses. In the round portion that you see here on the left, you have these little, what I would like to call little coves or catacombs that the statues of the god and goddesses were located. So I kind of call the Pantheon the Walmart of temples. You can go there and you can sacrifice and honor or worship multiple gods and visit only one place. So kind of interesting there. Eventually, what's going to happen, and it will become converted into a church. It is still a church today. If you ever go to Rome, you can attend a Catholic Mass in the Pantheon. As I said, the little circle there in the top of the dome is known as the Eye of God. A lot of students ask about rainwater and does it, they have something that catches it. That I'm not sure. I've never been. It's definitely on my bucket list. I'd love to go to see Rome and all these things that I've been teaching about for years. And so, not quite sure exactly, but definitely, if any of you want to Google it, please feel free. Now, one of the most famous buildings is the Colosseum. You can't go to Rome without seeing the Colosseum. The Colosseum was the center of entertainment. When we have the Colosseum with a capital C, this is the big Colosseum that you saw in the movie Gladiator, which is one of my favorite movies in the top right. Um, it's You have Colosseums throughout the Roman Empire. Again, when Rome starts to expand and increase their dominance, they're going to bring these sources of entertainment to those people, to those new regions that have been added to their empire. So you have smaller colosseums throughout, but the Colosseum, all caps, the Colosseum, is located in Rome. And of course, probably the most famous source of entertainment were the gladiator fights. These were people, individuals that some were enslaved people, some were destitutes, they're just poor who would find that they are good fighting. So they would train. You had gladiator schools that, um, I guess, in a sense, of kind of would be like sports teams, and certain schools would go against other schools, and you would have superstars, kind of like if any of you are familiar with playing fantasy football, You would have your big time quarterbacks or baseball players, big time pitchers or home run hitters. So it's one of those things where it was a huge source of entertainment, but at a grotesque um, price, if you will. We also, instead of gladiators fighting, you could go and see rare animals fight. People all throughout the Roman Empire would go capture animals and bring them in to watch them fight. And you see there in the top right a picture of a tiger. Um, and you notice the fact that there is a trap door, if you will, right behind the tiger, and you can see it right there. The fighting surface of the Colosseum was actually like the second or third floor of the building itself. We'll get to that in a few minutes, though. Obviously, you would have gladiators versus gladiators. You would also have gladiators fighting animals. You would also see executions here. One of the most horrific sources of entertainment was the fact of Christians would be executed in the Colosseum. I'm not sure exactly what the numbers, but I know it's up in the thousands. So public executions, um, it was something that for a long time, even up through um, the um, early 20th century, public executions, hangings, things of that nature was, I don't know necessarily say a source of entertainment, but to me it was one of those things where um, it kind of, when it comes to executions, prevents that behavior from happening. Now, as far as the Christians go, keep in mind at this point in time, the Roman Empire was still worshiping their mythological gods and goddesses, Jupiter and Venus, and all those that we talked about earlier. So let's continue on. So this is an artist rendition of what the Colosseum probably looked like. Now, the awning or the cover would go all the way around, all right, and kind of helped with the sun and the glare for those that are sitting in the stands. And some students in the past have asked about the little figures, if you will, in the windows. And those are statues. Um, as I said, famous athletes like Babe Ruth or Mickey Mantle or Joe Montana, the famous athletes of their sports are going to be honored, whether it is a Hall of Fame or a jacket or a statue. And this was kind of the Hall of Fame for gladiators. And to honor them, they would have a statue created for them or of them to be placed in the Colosseum. And this is what it looks like today. Again, I've never been there before. It's a place I would love to go. I've seen some more recent pictures of where they actually have built part of the stage that the gladiators fought on. So what you're looking at here, and I'll continue that thought in a second, is you're looking at the basement, the innards of the Colosseum. This is where you would house the gladiators. This is where the weapon storage would be. The animals would have crates and cages in here. And you would have a series of elevators and pulleys that would allow the doors to open, allow dramatic entrances to come in. If you look, there's a kind of like a lip that goes around this image, and this is where the stage would be. This would be the where a huge stage, and the fighting surface would be. On that fighting surface, you would have sand, you would have wood chips, you would have sawdust. All these things were used to absorb any type of blood or other fluids that were spilled during these bouts. So you don't want to go and have blood oozing everywhere and step on it on a hard surface because it'll become slippery. So this this was not just a source of entertainment. You would have a lot of betting and gambling going on. So it would be very disappointing for a gambler to go and bet on an individual to win, and he slips on a puddle and accidentally stabs himself and dies. So, again, the sand and sawdust and wood chips would help absorb those. And as you can see, it was a huge, massive arena. Okay. All right. So, as I said today, I've seen pictures where they have built a portion of the stage and have allowed people to come out to kind of get a sense of what it would have been like. Um, and again, if you ever watched the movie Gladiator, they did a lot of computer graphics, some CGI with it, and it was pretty impressive. Another piece of architecture is the Forum. The Forum is a marketplace for the Romans. It's equivalent to, for the Greeks, we call that the Agora, but in Rome we call it the Forum. Again, marketplace. Courts were held here where you can go and be entertained, kind of like if you watch Judge Judy or Judge Joe Brown type of thing. So that's what an artist viewed it to be like. And again, if you notice the difference here, remember we talked about citizenship, and who do you think these individuals would be? Where would they fall? These would probably be, I would say, patricians. And over here, you got a little bit of a lower earth tone clothing. I would think that would be more of a plebeian here. And then you have some legions, your soldiers, your Roman guards over here to the right. So what does it look like now? That's what it looks like now. A lot of these ancient buildings are in ruins, not just because of bad times, but yes, there's of course the great World War One and World War II that had a drastic effect on these ancient structures, but also natural things like earthquakes and things of that nature. You also have um, times that were hard, and then they needed the building materials. So these ancient structures were torn down for the use of those materials. So let's take a look at technology. And again, keep in mind, technology are things that make life easier. And so for the Romans, roads were the big thing. And as you can see in this little diagram, which I really like, the Romans decided to make layers. And as you can, this was obviously before pavement, but you have large flat stones. Notice you have a drainage ditch. Notice the fact that you have a slight arc or a curve in the road to allow it to have water run off. So, again, pretty insightful. One thing, too, is the idea of cement. This is something that is a huge breakthrough for the Romans when it comes to architecture and engineering. So, again, roads helped tremendously. There's that famous line, all roads lead to Rome. Well, what's going to happen is your Roman Empire is going to be so massive, you're going to need roads to connect it. And so they wanted these roads to last. They had no idea how long their empire was going to last. So they wanted to make sure these roads did. And there were still pieces of the Roman network of roads that's still being used throughout Europe today. To the bottom right, you have what's called an aqueduct. A lot of people are like, oh, it's at the James River. No. But throughout Europe and throughout the Roman Empire, aqueducts were used to transport water from one place to the next. And it's very fascinating how this was done. There's a very small incline. For instance, so a football field is 100 yards. That's 300 feet. So if you go from one side, one end zone to the other, the incline is only about a half an inch. So think about that. 300 feet, it drops half an inch. And I might be exaggerating that a little bit. It might be even less than that. So there was just enough of an incline for the water to go through. Sometimes the aqueducts, depending upon how much money was put forth to construct them, were covered and protected by from the elements and other things. Whereas the further away and the less expensive aqueducts did not have a cover. And one of the things that helped to construct these was the Roman arches. The idea of having this curve, and you can see the small arches up top, medium, larger ones, if you will, going across the bottom, would help not only save material, obviously, but it also allows the wind to go through it. They realize that if you build a solid wall for the aqueducts, that the wind would hit it, causing more force and the potential collapse of the aqueduct. So allowing these arches to allow the wind to go through was a huge achievement in the engineering. So again, here's a map of roads that we know of today. And again, the roads actually branch out, up here from Britain down to Spain, Gaul. Remember, we talked about that in our last unit or our last video. All right, Italy. You have the Balkan Peninsula with Greece. Hopefully, you remember the three names of this peninsula. Remember, it's Anatolia, Asia Minor, or modern day Turkey. We have Egypt down here. And right here is where you have Carthage. So, again, this huge network of roads for Rome. So, in the field of science, we had a guy, his name is Ptolemy. Now, the P is silent, it's not Ptolemy, but it's Ptolemy. And he believed that the Earth was at the center of the universe, what's called a geocentric model, and that everything went around the Earth. Now, to me, what's kind of fascinating is by this design, by this model, if you were to replace the sun and Earth, it is what it is. It's exactly how it is. So he's off a little bit with that. But again, we're talking about thousands of years ago. This guy came up with this thought. And for a very long time, for about 1,500 years, that thought stood in place. No one challenged it. So, pretty fascinating. As far as medicine goes, we talked about public health before this year. We talked about it when we talked about India and how the ancient Indus River Valley developed a sewer system and realized that by going and bathing, you actually prolong your life. You actually prevent the spread of germs and disease. It takes another couple hundred years from the fall of the Indus Valley to finally get this concept into Europe. So these public baths and the public water systems definitely help with that. We definitely see more access to public water due to the aqueducts. We also start to see an increase in medical schools popping up throughout the Roman Republic, Empire as well. We also have Romance languages. When we talk about Romance languages isn't something lovey dovey. I know Valentine's Day is coming up. I know Walmart's already got their candy and their Valentine's out. We're not talking about type romance. What we're talking about is languages that come from the Roman language Latin. Those of you that are taking Spanish right now, or if you're online taking French, these two are from Latin. They have a lot of root words in Latin. There's certain things that when you look at not just French, Spanish, but if you also look at Portuguese, Romanian, and Italian, there's a lot of root words that come back to the ancient language of the Romans, Latin. So that's why we call them Romance languages. As far as literature goes, what we're going to look at is a guy named Virgil. And Virgil's a poet, and he writes a story called the Aeneid. And ironically, the Aeneid is very similar to Homer's, from ancient Greece, Homer's story, the Iliad. So again, it's kind of an interesting concept. How obviously we don't have plagiarism yet, so it's very interesting how all of a sudden Virgil kind of retells the story, but names it Aeneid. So I'm sure Homer's somewhere going, "Don't!" But again, Virgil is the huge uh, breakthrough poet for Rome. So when we talk about religion, and we're going to talk about rise of Christianity in part 4. But what's going to happen with Rome is it's going to start with Roman mythology. It's going to start with polytheism. Okay, the worship and the belief of many gods and goddesses, and it's going to end up uh, in the last part of the empire being a strong believer in the Christian faith, which is, again is monotheism. So there's a huge transition between polytheism and monotheism. And last, we have laws. And the idea of innocent until proven guilty, coming from the 12 tables, is a lasting impression that we talk about still to this very day. And so, even though Beavis and Butthead want to break the law is there to prevent those things from happening and to ideally keep people safe. So, the next time we meet and you visit, we will be talking about the Christian faith, how it got started, and what are the key characteristics and beliefs in the Christian faith. So, thank you again for tuning in. I greatly appreciate your time. Please stay safe, and until next time.